Today, Mayhem rules. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Today, I'm joined by journalist Tarric Brooker for our Friday afternoon conversation. Hi, Tarric.
G'day, Martin. How are you?
I'm pretty good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Just watching it all unfold, just as always.
All unfold is the word. Wherever you look, there are things happening, going bang, whoosh, all over the place, like a massive amount of fireworks all going off at the same time. It's really crazy, isn't it?
It certainly is, and I think that there's just a whole lot of different narratives that are really sort of somewhat, shall we say, not quite falling apart, but showing quite a bit of stress at the moment.
Yeah, well, to me, what it's doing is it's sort of peeling back the onion a bit and showing just how rotten the onion actually is inside, right? So it might look okay on the surface. But, to give you an example, right? So we've seen pressure on the bond markets over the last couple of weeks. And, of course, the Reserve Bank was buying busily and continues to buy busily to try and support its 3-year target. But, of course, the long-term rate, the 10-year, is going up. It's going up in the US. And Powell came on overnight and said, well, yeah, we're going to focus on the short term. We don't think inflation's an issue.
We want to see labor market conditions consistent with our assessment of maximum employment. We'd want to see inflation sustainably at 2%. These are highly desirable outcomes that that would represent an economy that's very far along the road to recovery. As it relates to the bond market, we want to see and would be concerned if we didn't see orderly conditions in markets, and we don't want to see a persistent tightening in broader financial conditions. That's really the test. We think we're likely to see inflation move up during the course of this year. Businesses will be potentially hit by a lot of demand as the economy recovers, which is a good thing. But you could see bottlenecks, you could see prices moving up. We're inclined to see those as transient. As far as the rate liftoff guidance, it's pretty specific. And as I said, it will take some time to get there.
Which wasn't what the markets were hoping for. The markets were hoping that he would actually bail them out down the yield curve. And as a result of that, the stock markets took a bit of a tumble.
They did, and I think we sort of need to really just touch on a little bit of how the RBA's QE works. Like, the Fed and the US has been doing QE for a long time. So has the Bank of Japan and the European Central Bank. But the RBA is quite late to the party here.
Surprise.
But that's what's interesting. The Fed owns about 17% of all outstanding US treasuries. So, they own about 17% of the US national government debt. But here in Australia, the RBA is already on course for buying $200 billion worth of debt. And that's, obviously there's some state debt and stuff and others mixed in there, but you're talking about 20 to 25% of debt in such a short period of time. The Fed did it over 13 years. We're doing it over 12 to 18 months. And that's, a lot of people say, but the RBA needs to do more QE to the moon. But they can't. The other day they bought $4 billion worth of government bonds, federal government bonds. But they can't keep doing that. You're talking, they bought more than half a percent of all outstanding Australian federal debt in one day. One day. For the Fed to do the equivalent of that, they would need to buy more than $140 billion worth of bonds in one day. And not even in the most sort of crazy dreams of the QE interventionists would the Fed do such a thing. Only obviously if something had completely broken in the market. But all the RBA is trying to do is defend their yield curve target, which I might add was an incredibly stupid decision. But here we are.
Well, that's interesting because, of course, a few of the international observers have suggested that maybe the Reserve Bank was essentially emulating and following what the Fed was doing, and in fact maybe the Fed was encouraging them to do it to demonstrate that we central bankers, we've got big arms and legs and we can do this if we really want to, right? Except that, well, actually you can go buy a lot of stuff, but it doesn't necessarily impact that long-term rate, which is still going up.
Exactly. And the problem with yield curve control is it's an unlimited commitment. When you commit to doing yield curve control, you are committing to doing whatever it takes to keep bond yields below a certain target. For the RBA, that's 0.1% on the 3-year. And consistently, we've seen over the last few weeks, it keeps jumping up and jumping up and jumping up. We've seen as high as, I think, 0.18%. Sorry, I think it was 0.184%. So you're talking about 84% higher in relative terms, higher than what the RBA wants. And that's just nuts. They say they're in control, but they're quite clearly not.
No. Well, it's interesting, and I've held the view for some time that a lot of the central banks are relying on their ability to convince the market that they know what they're doing, and they keep jawboning and hoping the market will respond. But I think the market is calling them out a little bit now and saying, well, hang on a moment, we would have expected you to actually support that long end, and you didn't. People were talking about Operation Twist, which is where effectively they buy at the long end and sell at the short end to sort of tweak the yield curve down. No one's wanting to do that. The Fed certainly isn't. So it does beg the question, are we beginning to see those really significant cracks now appearing in central bank strategy? And bearing in mind, of course, that the US is going to be throwing some more stimulus on the fire of the economy quite soon, the 1.9 trillion or whatever it ends up to be. In Australia, of course, the local economy in some ways looking a little better than it was previously, so their expectations are more positive. But it really is asking some rather searching questions of central bank strategy and quantitative easing in particular.
It is. I mean, the whole idea is that quantitative easing actually works. But the reality is that the BOJ has been pursuing it for years now. The ECB has been pursuing it for years now. And what has it realistically achieved besides the inflation of asset prices? It hasn't really accomplished anything in the real economy. And I mean, the other day I saw this ridiculous analysis that said that, that QE was key in getting the US unemployment rate down. I'm like, no, okay, so it's QE. It's not the enormous deficits that Trump is running and the fact that he's allowing the US economy the fiscal side of the US economy to run hot.
No, well, it's very interesting, isn't it, that anybody who's been watching the history of QE, and you have to look at Japan and you have to look at the ECB because they've been at it the longest, right? And in fact, the central bank in Japan owns a lot of the economy of Japan because they've been buying. What don't they own? An interesting question, right? There is something here that suggests that this whole approach is actually not necessarily going to take us to a good place. The analogy I used, in fact, I used it yesterday when I was talking to Steve Van Meter, our US correspondent, who believes that the bond market is the critical benchmark of what's happening, right? And the analogy I used was we're circling a black hole, right? And we're going round and round around this black hole, right? But we don't have enough escape velocity to get away from it. We're just going round and round and getting closer and closer to that black hole. That is how I picture quantitative easing, right? And you can throw a bit more in and try and sort of go around again, but it's not fundamentally solving the underlying economic issue that we're facing, and in fact, it's making things worse because it's just increasing the asset price balloon and also the debt bomb.
No, absolutely, and that's the real big problem with QE in this overall broad context, because the more they intervene in both fiscal and monetary policy, the higher the risks get that there's something could break. That we could see, Michael Burry of Big Short fame, his theory about, hyperinflation coming into place, or, we could even see the opposite if something breaks. We could see sort of rampant deflation if something just all of a sudden snaps in the plumbing of financial markets and credit markets, because they've completely distorted reality. Bond yields no longer represent the reality of the situation, either to the upside and to the downside. Junk bonds don't represent the yield. Their yields don't represent the risks that you take when you take out these bonds, or the commercial mortgage-backed securities market. But by the same token, based on the sort of short-term nature of rising inflation, the ISM prices paid, sub-index, all that sort of thing, bonds, sort of government bonds, don't represent the risk in terms of inflation on that end of the curve either. So you've just got this incredibly distorted market. And, it's like holding a beach ball underwater. You hold it, and then all of a sudden it just goes poof.
Yeah, if you try and spell that, it would be a very good word to put in one of your articles sometime. But no, it's right. It is, and the more you actually drag the the economy from its sort of natural course, as it were, the greater the pressures that are being built up. And essentially, if it does come back, then it's going to come back more sharply and potentially create more grief. I suppose you could argue the same about house prices. If house prices run away a long time or off mean, eventually they're going to come back towards mean. And all of these things just say to me that the recipe that's been deployed for the last 12 years or so, or probably more, probably closer to 15, 20 years, and the role of central banks and how central banks are coordinated. Interestingly, we think that there were some conversations over the last weekend when central bankers, from different countries got together and said, right, we're going to try and support the targets, right? And they each sort of entered their markets and tried to support them, and the market said, no, we're not having that. So I'm not sure that this actually is going to lead anywhere very positive. But, of course, central bankers will go on doing more and just doing more of it.
They will, and I think that they're just going to keep rehashing the same thing over and over again. I think we probably will see Operation Twist again, sort of, 2.0 or 3.0, whatever they're up to at this point. And I think, I read this analysis yesterday by this US-based investment analyst, and he was saying that the Fed, what's sort of going around rumor-wise is that the Fed is going to sell 1 and 3 year duration US government bonds to buy 10 through 30. Now, that would be a disaster for the RBA, because that would drive global yields in that range of the 1 to 3 year through, not through the roof. I mean, it may do, but it would definitely place significant upward pressure on them. I mean, you're already seeing the Canadian 3 year trading north of 0.5%, which is more than 5 times the RBA's target. And you've got to ask, Canada, Australia, they're not really all that dissimilar in terms of, their exposure to commodity markets and, their relative, wealth and, size, etc. So you've really got to ask yourself, why would you buy an Australian government bond if the US or Canada or someone else is going to be offering a much, much higher yield? And they're not only that, but they're going to be actively selling those bonds, which is going to be reducing the value of the bond, raising the yield. And it doesn't really make any sense. And that's going to smack the RBA really, really hard. And more than that, to go back into the housing price conversation, that's going to smack the banks as well, because they're no longer going to be able to raise cheap money, or as cheap money, should I say, at that end of the curve and offer these lovely 2, 3, 4 year fixed mortgages at, sort of well sub 2%.
Well, I agree with that. And I guess the question I've got for you, Tarric, is we understand what central bankers and central banks are doing, right? We know what the Treasurer and, the government thinks. I can't see how the two are connected at the moment, right? Because essentially, isn't everything wonderful? The latest data show that the GDP was, above 3%, and the unemployment's a little bit lower than some were thinking, and we're sort of got that V shape in the GDP. So isn't everything in the garden lovely? And yet we're still talking about this massive sort of quantitative easing programs. Something doesn't triangulate.
No, it doesn't. But I mean, all you have to do is really just open the paper to some of these sort of analyses from, various commentators and researchers. I mean, the Australian had an article in it the other day that talked about up to 250,000 jobs being lost when JobKeeper concluded. And there's a plethora of those various different things going on, especially these analyses about sort of, areas that are reliant on tourism or areas that are reliant on foreign students. All these, things, these problems haven't gone away. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that government spending as a percentage of GDP, with the exception of off the wall sort of places like the Second World War, aside from the earlier pre-COVID points, we're still something like somewhere between, I think, 7 and 10% of a greater level of government expenditure as percentage of GDP. We're at about 45% of the economy is the government, and it's normally somewhere between 30 and 35. So it's all well and good for them to be, for Josh Frydenberg and Scott Morrison to be, waving the victory flag and saying, look at a fantastic job we've done. But it's like, you guys are still injecting shed loads of money into the economy. Of course it's going well, you idiots.
Well, that's right. And of course, the savings that people had, through last year when they couldn't spend, essentially got put into those savings ratios. It went up close to 20%. It dropped quite dramatically last time now. And so we've got now households starting to spend. And interestingly, my mortgage stress measure went up in February, which surprised me a bit. It wasn't what I was expecting. But we're looking at the data closely. What I'm finding is that households who had a little bit of padding and leeway have now got rid of it because they've been spending stuff. And so they're now under more pressure. So we've got this really interesting narrative where at one level everything's fine. But when you start, as I say, peeling the onion, you start digging around, you see that things are less than good. And your point about particular segments of the economy struggling, I think is really important. I'm seeing this, of course, with retail. I'm seeing it with the education sector, tourism sector, and a few others too. And the question I have is, with the borders now locked down for another 3-4 months at least, longer than people were expecting, how much of that's going to change? I suspect probably not. So what will they do? Will they provide more specific stimulus for another few months or just let it go? I suspect they'll do something, but the question then is, well, will it be effective and will it get us to where we want to get to?
Well, realistically, we're going to find out in the next few weeks. You know, if they're going to pull a rabbit out of the hat, they have to do it in the next probably 2 weeks.
That's right.
Because the end of JobKeeper is coming up. You know, they've still got the sort of political impetus to maybe do that. Although, by the same token, every piece of positive data that comes out makes it harder for the government, because it makes it harder for them to justify this to the party room, because they end up believing, you know, the party room believes the hype, that everything's great, that everything's going to be fine from here, and that, you know, everything's going to be hunky-dory. And that is increasingly becoming sort of, what's the word, just government policy almost. And one of the things I think is quite misleading about the way that the government is going about this is, you get Josh Frydenberg's up there talking about, look at this household saving rate, look at how much this is going to benefit the economy. But there is a big caveat to all that relative to other countries, because our savings rate includes superannuation. And all these other countries that don't have this same sort of similar savings program. So what you really need to do when you look at the savings rate is take away 9.5%. Jared Minack has a great chart of this that shows basically Australians are garbage at saving in recent decades, because it's like, oh, but Australians are saving 12% of their income, of their household income. No, they're not. They're saving more like 2.5 or 3. So, when they say, 12% household savings rate, all that means is that Australians aren't burning through their savings for the first time in yonks, and they're actually saving something.
Yeah, well, some are, of course. It goes back to this point about averages don't tell you everything, right? We know that there is a proportion of the population that have done reasonably well and have some savings, etc., etc. But we also know that there's another chunk of the population with almost no savings and nowhere to run to, and they're the ones where, of course, the mortgage stress is the most worrying and high. And by the way, the unemployment rate in those segments and the underemployment, which is the other critical measure, is higher in those segments too. So we've got this sort of real weird tilting going on where, again, we've got part of the economy and part of households doing well, but others not. And again, I think averaging probably masks a lot of really important stuff.
Well, that's something that I sort of wanted to broach with you on the topic of household confidence, spending into the future, that sort of thing. Because as it stands, there's all of these, sort of things, saying, they've got Frydenberg up there saying everyone's going to spend, it's all going to be hunky-dory. We've saved $200 billion since the crisis began. And that's obviously split between households and businesses. But the thing is, only when asked in a news.com poll, only 19% of people said that they had savings and that they would spend them. So the question then becomes, are we sort of got this weird sort of, I don't even know what you'd call it, this weird sort of Mexican standoff between households, that they all look at each other and they go, well, I think you're going to spend, you seem to be spending, and you're spending now, so maybe you're going to keep spending, so therefore I should be confident. But then by the same token, when it comes to their own finances, they're looking at things being a little bit more circumspect.
Yeah, well, it's quite clear that not everybody is in the same boat, right? So there are some doing quite well and they're saving and spending and feeling pretty good about themselves. And of course, many of them work from home rather than actually having to travel. So they spent less traveling and less traveling time. So they've done well, but others less so. And that's why I always try to come back to my segmentation analytics, because segmentation really tries to, if you like, paint some pictures of different types of households. So we know that there are some who are actually up against it, who are losing hours and who are losing income. We know that quite a few of them are the ones with the multiple loans, using payday loans, or indeed using Afterpay and the equivalent alternatives there. Sidebar, you notice that the industry has now brought in a voluntary code for the buy now, pay later sector, right, which is really very, very encouraging. Not. So the point is that, again, you've got this concentration into some segments where you've got big issues and lack of savings. You've got other segments doing a lot better. So that's why segmentation becomes really important, to try and understand precisely where the issues are. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand why you do segmentation and what it means, but that's the reason, because it's not a single use case, it's multiple use cases.
Well, exactly. And that's one of the really big problems that we have going forward for Australia, because you do have all these households that do have savings. That's been repeated in Australia, the UK, and around the world. But by the same token, as your data has shown, I mean, in Victoria, something like 40% of households don't have little to no savings. And like, well, what happens to those people? What happens to Victoria? What happens, especially in particular, to lower socioeconomic suburbs in Victoria, where people don't have the incomes, they don't have the savings, and they're already struggling very, very badly as a result of lockdowns and the virus. And what's going to happen to those people? It's all well and good to say, oh, but the economy is produced X or Y amount of GDP growth, and overall income growth is doing is up. But that's great. That's great for the Lamborghini dealership. It's great for the Prada retailer. But if you're just a mum and dad retail shop in a low socioeconomic area, and you're seeing all these shops close around you as people can't spend, it doesn't mean anything to you. It just if anything, it just makes you feel even more horrible that you're managing to fail while everyone else is seemingly managing to succeed, regardless of the fact that sort of perception is untrue. But that's what's being presented.
Absolutely, and there are areas around Melbourne like Point Cook, Werribee, Cranbourne, Narrewarren, right? Quite similar profiles. So a lot of new development, a lot of people moving, a lot of first generation Australians there as well. A lot of them in huge amounts of financial pressure. Quite a few of them got big mortgages, a lot of debt, no savings, limited hours. And you can see this being repeated again and again and again. So one of the things that I do is I create heat maps looking at individual areas. And if you actually look at the heat maps of Melbourne, I'll put it up on the screen to show, you can see these bands of dark red where basically a lot of households are in financial difficulty. Now, there are other areas where it's nothing like the same. But to try and sort of put it all together and say, well, on average, it's this. No, there's no such thing as an average. You've got some people over there doing really well. You've got some people over here doing a lot less well. And of course, that takes you into an interesting debate about, well, what are the policy levers you should be pulling? Because if you pull the policy levers in one direction, some people are going to be over-benefited. If you're going to pull them the other way, it's going not to be sufficient to be able to support them. This is why it gets quite complicated.
Yeah, well, the problem is that they're realistically, I think they've done pulling most of the policy levels for the moment anyway. It doesn't really matter that people are suffering. That doesn't really, enter that much into the equation, all that much, to be completely honest with you. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's unfortunate, and there are people like myself who vehemently oppose the current sort of status quo. But if you look at things like the $50 a fortnight increase to JobSeeker, it's pretty clear that the government isn't really interested in intervening further in that sort of space. But I think, and also just on the topic of the lack of that intervention going into the future, I think that we're at this sort of interesting crossroads. Like you look at, say, Europe, you're seeing retail sales go down the toilet. Even in the US, before they sent out those extra $600 checks, retail was tanking. And it's not just the virus. You're seeing it. You're seeing the impact even in areas that are less impacted by the virus. It's still occurring because basically the stimulus is just, I'm not going to say running out, but it's feeding through the economy, and it's being slowly exhausted, as you would expect with government stimulus. But then that raises the question for Australia. We're reaching, the end of the road in terms of the bulk of government stimulus, at least on paper. Whether or not that changes, who knows? But now is the time that we're going to start seeing, weakness starting to feed into the economy. We're going to start to see it from, JobKeeper being tapered, and perhaps that's why we're starting to see more mortgage stress rise in your data. But once we get into sort of April, the April quarter, the September quarter, and we get into that sort of time, that's when I think we're going to start seeing these things feed in, because Australians are really an optimistic and overly confident lot. We haven't had a real recession in 30 years. Even the recession that we have had is like, some sort of weird, I don't even know how to describe it, to be completely honest with you, but it's just a non-recession. I mean, you look at the number of, you look at the price of used cars, like, old Commodore station wagons going for like, 25 or 30 grand, all this sort of stuff. But so we've got this overly confident public. You've got the Westpac Consumer Sentiment Index pricing in basically an enormous economic boom. You've got all these different things pricing in a really, really sort of, dynamic recovery that's going to be fantastic and everything's going to be wonderful. But that's not what's going to happen as all the stimulus is withdrawn. So I think that we're in for this really interesting time where all of these people who've placed all of their chips on things recovering are going to find themselves increasingly disappointed as time goes on.
Well, it's certainly going to take a few months to really shake through. So let's just play through the mortgage sector, right? So the last of those mortgage holidays, principal interest holidays, will end at the end of March, right? Then you start the clock. And basically nothing happens for 90 days because, until you're 90 days under water, nothing really starts. Then the bank starts getting interested and they start, thinking about what to do. And so you're looking 3 to 5 months down the track, right, which takes us into the second half of the year. So I wouldn't expect to see much happening with regard to mortgage default levels until quite a lot later in the year because of that. You could argue the same, I think, also with some of these SMEs that are still struggling, and I see it in my data, and I've spoken to a couple of insolvency practitioners in the last week, and they're seeing a big uptick in terms of people now reaching out for help with their business to work out how to actually close it down effectively. But that process isn't something you do in a week. It takes 3 to 5 months to sort of see through. So you would expect business insolvencies to start going up later in the year. And then you've got this issue with the JobKeeper, job seeker thing, which again is disappearing at the end of March. Again, households will find themselves in some difficulty, but that financial pressure doesn't sort of immediately jump up. It sort of ekes up over a period of time, over a number of months. So I think each of that would suggest to me that September is going to be a really interesting time. And I should be very interested to see whether the peak in house prices that we are seeing at the moment, which I think is a bit artificial for all sorts of reasons, tailors off. So by September, will prices also be sliding as well? So it could be that 6 months' time, things will look rather different.
The housing price question is quite interesting because I've been having a chat with Edwin about that, and we are seeing sort of nationally we're seeing quite low amounts of stock on the market, but by the same token there are certain areas where they're seeing much higher levels of stock and much either back prices going backwards, prices stagnating, or prices not rising by nearly as much as the headline indices would have you sort of believe. So there's this really interesting sort of juxtaposition going on at the moment between these different factors. But it also makes you wonder what is going to happen when we do start to see stock volumes on, when I say stock, I mean stock on market for the housing market.
Yep.
What's going to happen when we start to see that rise? Because we're right now, we're almost 30% below where we've been on average in the last 5 years in terms of the amount of stock on the market. And this isn't really something that moves around a whole lot. It's not like, like the stock market or other sort of, financial markets. It's usually within a sort of fairly narrow band in the grand scheme of things. So we're well down from where we were before. So I'm sort of wondering, are we going to start to see stock coming on the market? Because, I mean, this is something we've discussed in the past. People are saying they're going to sell.
Yeah.
But they're not yet pulling the trigger on mass.
No, that's right. And it's interesting, again, the forward intentions in terms of intending to sell was much stronger a couple of months ago. In fact, some people are saying, well, maybe I'll hang on. So some property investors, for example, who were deeply underwater and are still underwater in cash flow terms, are saying, well, if prices are going to rise over the next 6 to 12 months, maybe I should hang on in a bit longer and just see whether I can make some more capital gains before I sell. So that's definitely one factor. Though interestingly, I'm seeing a very significant divergence between houses, particularly in the major urban centres of Sydney and Melbourne, and units, particularly high-rise units. High-rise units are still going horribly backwards, and I'm seeing higher levels of intent to sell from those high-rise property investors who bought off the plan a few years ago, or who bought more recently, and I just can't get anybody to rent the property. So it really is, again, it's a matter of you have to go granular to really see what's going on. Also, of course, the smaller markets in regional Australia is a bit more buoyant than the central business districts and in and around Sydney and Melbourne, in those inner suburban areas where I do think there are some issues. And interestingly, CoreLogic reported today that the most significant spikes in price growth has been right at the top end of the market. Now, those people don't need mortgages. They're independently wealthy and can do what they want pretty much all the time. So in a way, they've been isolated from everything else that's going on. So I'm looking a little bit more deeply at the lower end of the market. So, the examples would be these modern subdivisions of villas, where you've got two or three on a plot. And a lot of those aren't looking so hot in terms of price movements, as well as the high rise, which is looking very, very sick, and of course more supply coming on. So I think that again, I always say this: you have to go granular. You have to actually look at individual areas. You can't just talk generically about averages, because averages really do deceive, particularly at the moment.
Indeed, and I just on the sort of point of sort of how things are going to unfold, and the sort of broader story in just for the property market, for the economy, for everything else. I think we're very much looking at a Q3 story at this point. We're looking at this sort of the sort of longer, drawn out end of tapering of stimulus sort of scenario. And, and not obviously that's true in the housing market as well, with the tapering and the end and the conclusion of mortgage deferrals. We'll also see the end of the bank's foreclosure bans. All those sorts of things will finally be happening. And I think we're heading for like this really sort of key point. But by the same token, in the meantime, I think that there's going to be this frankly annoying amounts of euphoria from certain quarters,
of course,
because I look at all this data, and there isn't really a whole lot there to support it globally. Now, I get in Australia we can talk about, look at how great this is, look at retail, look at the GDP figures, but that's only part of the story. You're talking about an economy that has had, something like $300 billion thrown at it and been minimally impacted by the virus. And unlike a lot of other economies, the fact that people can't travel has actually benefited the economy more than the hit that we've taken from not having international tourists. Now, while that hasn't obviously benefited, say like Far North Queensland or other areas that are reliant on tourism, if you're talking about the local JB Hi-Fi or the local Harvey Norman, they've benefited from it enormously, or the local car dealership, because, people have gone out and they've spent their money on other things. But the thing I think is just going to be interesting in the next, say, 3 to 6 months, before we get to that point where it starts to become clear what's going on in the economy, is the story of the issues with bond yields, and also just the issues with global financial markets in general, because they are throwing off a lot of concerning signals. And I think that is probably one of the few things that could really derail, aside from the issues with the virus, but just from a sort of more economic and finance, side of things, that is one of the few things that could really just nuke the economy and nuke the housing market as it stands. Because, if we see another meltdown, we're basically back where we were last year, because the virus still hasn't gone away. And those issues that were affecting the housing market and creating uncertainties in March and April will be back, except this time there isn't the banks and APRA and the RBA all stepping in with the justification of the virus. Because if you're going to try and sell the extension of mortgage deferrals and all this other sort of stuff to the banks, they're going to be like, well, why? Why should we? Why should we sacrifice those profits? If people are in trouble, housing prices are rising, just bloody sell it.
Well, I'm already seeing some of that. So there's definitely some people who are being forced to sell. Not foreclosed, but just being encouraged very firmly by the banks because their income has permanently changed. So I think we're going to see probably more of that. And I agree with you that the the forward-looking view internationally is still not very flash. If you look at what's happening with the virus, it's interesting how a lot of people are hanging on the vaccine as the thing to solve everything, right? But there's still a long way to go there. And did you see the UK? The UK announced their budget yesterday, and in fact the Treasurer signalled very clearly some rises of corporate tax down the track and the freezing of personal tax allowances, because they need to actually bring more tax back into the system to try and help cover the debt that's been created because of the virus. That's the first signal that I've seen, which is something which people need to wake up to, and that is that taxes will probably go up down the track.
They will. I mean, there was an article in The Australian yesterday of John Howard basically singing from a similar song sheet that, we can't keep going on this, stimulus never, that we just put everything on the nation's credit card and then just hope for the best. Now, I mean, the UK isn't the only one who's talking about all this. You'll start to see the similar issues in the US as the Republicans return to their fiscally conservative roots. You're already starting to see it in Spain, where they've jacked up taxes on things like insurance and also income tax on higher income earners as well. And that's just the beginning. I mean, these countries, the UK, Spain, the US, they're going to need fiscal support for their economies for a long time to come. Now, as much as some people would just like to be able to flip the switch and turn it all off tomorrow, that kind of, what shall we call it? That kind of strategy towards just basically switching off the expansionary fiscal impulse, aka growing, sort of large deficits, large amounts of stimulus injected into the economy. If you do that, it's just gonna fall to pieces, in relatively short order. I mean, if you look at, say, US retail sales, sort of pre the last stimulus checks, they were tanking. They were heading south again. If you look at EU retail sales, they're tanking and were tanking before the virus started to take hold yet again. So personally, I don't really sort of price the vaccine and the virus into all this stuff. I just go, look, the vaccine is going to make things better. Now, I don't think that's what's going to happen, but that's just what I use as my base case, because frankly, I think it's kind of pointless arguing with people about it, because it's just pointless. But the thing is, I just view that as the base case. And to be honest, things are already going badly wrong enough without the virus having a resurgence, without it, sort of getting around the vaccines, continuing to mutate in the developing world beyond the reach of these more effective vaccines, which require, sort of more challenging, logistical chains and all these sorts of things. I think that we've already got enough problems as it is. We've already piled into, what was it last year, $24 trillion of additional debt. Yep. We've already got enough problems without considering that. Now, if there's a resurgence of the virus and all this other stuff, then we're stuffed. Then it's going to be more stimulus and QE to the moon. And, well, I think we both know how that ends in the long run.
Yeah, I've seen that film before, I think. And it's not going to end differently this time. But yeah, you are right. There are a lot of obstacles whizzing around at the moment. I guess one last one we should just touch on is the ridiculous discussions going on in Canberra with regard to behaviour and all of those sorts of things. And without getting into the particular cases, it does say something about our political class and the way that they behave, doesn't it?
Oh God, that's a toughie. No, the reality is that from a historical perspective, once upon a time, forgetting to declare a teddy bear in your luggage to customs was enough to get you to resign as a minister. And that was only a couple of decades ago. It wasn't really that long ago in the grand scheme of things. You're not talking about the 1920s or something like that. But, and this is something that's probably going to piss a few people off, but what's new? I think that Australians really need to have a look at themselves and not just the politicians in the media, because Scott Morrison, as it stands, according to the last news poll, has a higher approval rating than Bob Hawke ever had. He's only 5 points off the highest approval rating in Australian history. Now, what does that say about Australians? What does that say? Like, don't get me wrong. I'm 100% with you. We need high levels of accountability for politicians. We need them to be held to a higher standard than the rest of us. They need to be beyond reproach, human, but beyond reproach. And if they make a mistake, they need to admit it. That's what we need. But by the same token, the media does hold them accountable at times. Now, I know that there's issues with that I'm not going to get into for obvious reasons, but the media does do it. They do hold them accountable. I mean, you look at Samantha Maiden from news.com, you look at Peter Van Nonsen from The Australian, both of them have been going after the government hard over its conduct and over what's been occurring in recent weeks and months. But by the same token, ScoMo's approval rating is through the roof. People don't care. Now, if people, I mean, I hate to say it, and I know this is going to piss people off, but you get the government you deserve as an electorate. Now, I wish that more people cared and that we held the government accountable and there was electoral consequences for this sort of conduct. But look at sports rorts. Look at the fact, I mean, I just think back for a moment to the Howard government, right? Now, imagine if Peter Costello and John Howard didn't deliver the funding for bushfire recoveries or for any of the other things that the government's promised hasn't funded properly. That people under their leadership were still living in caravans and temporary accommodation more than a year after the disaster occurred, and they hadn't been provided with these adequate measures of support. Now, look, I know that when disasters happen, these things happen. People fall through the cracks. You see it all the time around the world, but this is different. They were promised help, and it hasn't come. That's the difference. And it just, I'm not going to get too annoyed. It's just, it needs to change, but the public needs to hold them accountable. It's all well and good for the media to get out there and for people to write articles. I know that it's challenging with the way things are and the way that the media landscape is at times, but we need to care about our politicians' conduct.
Absolutely, yes. Well, sometimes I think it's true. We get the politicians we deserve, and that's often by our own inaction or frankly making decisions with regard to how we vote more on the hip pocket than anything else, and just ignore the some of the other issues that perhaps we should be thinking about. By the way, I don't think it's just an Australian thing. I think it's a thing that's true in the US and in the UK and in many other countries too. I'm conscious of a recent French Prime Minister who's now in deep trouble, right? So, there seems to be a moral question here, and maybe it's just that we've given up caring. I don't know. It's just weird. I find this an interesting question, and you're right. The media, to an extent, holds some people to account to an extent, but there is something more about the underlying fibre of the country, and frankly, the fibre of people who should be voting and do vote, which raises some really worrying questions to me.
It reminds me of a quote from Frank Herbert's Dune. How does it go? It's not that power corrupts; it's that power is attractive to the corruptible.
Yes, good quote. Absolutely. Yeah.
No, but you're right though. It is a global problem, and I think that people in a lot of ways have just really switched off from politics. And to be completely honest, if it wasn't my job, perhaps I would feel the same. And I think the truth is that politicians, in broad terms, in terms of outcomes that they deliver for the electorate, for the wider electorate, have really been failing for a long time now. We've experienced in the years since the GFC. I mean, let's sort of, leave the sort of obvious despotic third world regimes and dodgy countries and stuff like that out of the equation. And we'll sort of focus on like the Anglosphere. You've got sort of New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the US and on the UK. Now, what has really been achieved since the GFC? Austerity in the UK gutted social services to the point where you don't really need to go into too much detail there. You know what happened with the police, the lack of firemen, all those sorts of things. Enormous problems. You look at New Zealand, where there's everybody's left-wing favourite darling, Jacinda Ardern. And, housing prices have completely exploded under her leadership. And not only that, but she's quite explicitly said that she doesn't want housing prices to fall. Now, I'm sorry, but some free market politician we got right there, I mean, that's me throwing some napalm on the fire. But, and then there's Trudeau.
Yeah.
Trudeau is just the male version of Arden, very, very popular with the left, very, very popular, very charismatic. By the same token, housing prices have exploded. He hasn't addressed the issues with the falling standards of living, and that's a problem across the entirety of the Anglosphere, the entirety of the Western world, to varying degrees. And it's something that really needs to be addressed. And then they turn around and they go, well, why are people not engaged? Because you're not doing things for them.
I wonder whether it comes back to something so simple, Tarric, as you only need 51%.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is the case. And in countries with first past the post, it's not even 51%.
Yeah. And what that suggests is that, you don't need to worry about a large proportion of the population. As long as you've got enough on your side and enough think that you're actually doing a reasonable job, you'll get re-elected. And if your real purpose in being in power is to get re-elected again, that's sort of the number one agenda. It seems to me that anything else is a very pale second. And I mean, I'm sure there are conviction politicians who really believe in what they do and believe that they are there for the broader good of the population. But I reckon you can count them on one or two hands, right? I think a lot of people are much more cynical about the political process in the process. Often career politicians, often people who've been in the party machines. And for them, it's just about self-perpetuation.
Well, unfortunately, that is the case in some cases. You see some of these politicians, they've been in office for 20, 30, 40, 50 years in some cases in some nations. And you've got to ask yourself, well, what have they really accomplished in that time? Think about all the issues that they've covered, all the issues that they've talked about on the television or, on the floor of Parliament, and what have they actually accomplished? And I think it speaks also to a sort of system and that sort of it drives small target, not only small target opposition, but small target government.
Yep.
There's these sort of big ideas of the past, of nation building infrastructure, of transforming a nation for the better in terms of expanding its industry and driving a new better way for a nation it just seems to have just faded away. And there's just too much, there's too much political gain to be had in doing very, very little and just sort of, fiddling around the edges. And I mean, to once again, criticize Joe Biden and, show that I'm that I'm not the raging lefty that people think I am in the comments. Like people say, oh, well, look at how different things are under Biden versus under Trump, and it's like, well, what do you mean? Are the kids still being put in cages? Yeah. Things aren't really all that different. And, don't get me wrong. Obviously, there are going to be differences, but they're not as vast as they once would have been. You're not talking about the difference between Nixon and Carter. You're not talking about, the difference between, say, Hawke and Howard. There's just this, I don't know. It's just a bit sad. It's a bit sad, really. I mean, we're sort of watching the, what I hope is not the death throes of true representative democracy.
Well, democracy, of course, always regarded as the best of all the worst options, right? Somebody, I think, was once quoted as saying. But the fact is that if we don't hold people to account and if we don't underscore the need for them to focus on the critical strategic things for us and not just the tactical, well, what's my tax going to be next year? Or how much can I get from the next government? That's part of the problem, it seems to me. But this is for me, the real important question, because in a way, whilst we can blame the virus and we can blame, central banks, etc., there is a much more fundamental question here, which is, what sort of country do we want? What sort of government do we want? And I wonder whether we should be thinking hard about that.
Well, we should. We won't. We won't. Well, let's be honest. I mean, I've even been trying to tone down the cynicism lately, but it's just not there. I mean, you need people to be what did Asimov once say? That you need an intellectually competent and engaged populace for democracy to work.
Yep.
And we don't have any. Yeah, well, we don't have an engaged populace.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as I wish that Australians were all as engaged and looking into the political issues as much as, say, you or I, or as many and many other of our followers who follow it as intently as we do, that it's just not there. And I don't really know what the answer is, to be completely honest with you, because, to be completely frank with you, it's sort of hard to understand entirely what's driven this change, because you need to diagnose the problem before you could solve it. And I think that there are a lot of different issues that have driven us to this point. I don't think it's just one thing or another that has had us arrive at this location. I think that it's a wide range of things that are both in us as individuals, but also in the system.
No, I tend to agree. And it's interesting because, it's trying to stand back and think about what's really going on. Philosophy is my training, so I tend to want to sort of stand back and ask that sort of why is it like this sort of question much more than many other people. And I can't find a simple answer. I mean, I think that social media is part of it. I think that the pressures on households are part of it. I think obviously the virus is part of it. The inability of people to feel that they're empowered to make decisions, and the fact that many governments are actually, frankly, taking things away from us rather than actually giving us more freedoms. I mean, all of those things seem to be part of the puzzle. But I just worry about where it's going to end up, unfortunately. And I hope that the storming of Congress isn't actually a paradigm of what we may see down the track. That would not be a good look.
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't. But in some ways, I mean, I just think that was sort of a bit of a cry for help.
Yep.
In a lot of ways, it wasn't, it wasn't like, the American Revolution with, that sort of thing, or, a major sort of fork in the road in terms of, an imminent, transformative change. But it just goes to show that there is that potential there for things to get quite disorderly quite quickly. And that's historically the way things have unfolded. People, the thing with revolutions and uprisings and stuff, they happen very slowly and then all at once. And it's very, very hard to look at the current system and look at how badly the politicians are failing the everyday people of their respective nations, and then think that this ends well. I mean, don't get me wrong. I hope that we get a wave of politicians who are going to step in and diagnose the problems and solve them and kick the central bankers up the arse and stop them from driving these enormous levels of inequality at the absolute worst possible time. But, I'd like to think that we're all wise enough here to know that's probably not going to happen, and that the self-interest from politicians is going to continue, and that they're going to keep, sort of politicking. They're just going to focus on, the focus is on pursuing their ideological agenda and their own, sort of political goals.
Well, that is what their end state is, isn't it? That's the end game for them, unfortunately. If you talk to people within the political machine, that's how they think. So,
I mean, it's funny, I talk to, it's funny though, because I talk to rank and file members of the Liberal Party, the Labor Party, people who go to these local meetings, they decide who are the local candidates are. And, most of them are idealistic, good people.
Yep.
Who just want what's best for the country.
Yep.
And then I just think, can we just pick these people? Or just, other people off the street to guide the country? Because I think that you sit down and talk with these people, and yes, obviously some of them have ideas that are not possible, that are logistically just nuts, because people don't understand exactly how the limitations on government work or the limitations on spending work.
Yep.
But by the same token, they've got a lot of good ideas, and I think there's a lot of bipartisan support for sort of this nation building type stuff, for this, whatever you think should be done, whether it's, providing, some sort of innovation fund that ends up being self-funding in the long run by providing venture capitals to startups and businesses, or whether it's, sort of different tax zones where startups and other businesses can move to foster their innovation, to escape government red tape and difficulties with, with taxes and fundraising and all these different things. And the thing is, I really truly believe that there is, in a lot of ways, something for everyone, but that requires, this ability to craft this narrative, to create something, to build something better, rather than just tinkering around the edges. And that's really what we've been doing for far too long.
Yeah, well, I agree. Well, I think it's about the vision thing. I think it's about leadership. I think it's about empowerment of individuals and local communities to take more responsibility. All those are big tasks, but I think it's a task that we should step up to, because the alternative is more of the same. And frankly, I don't want another 20 years like we've had.
It's funny. I have a great deal of faith in people as individuals and people as communities and groups and stuff. I mean, like I know some, quite a few startup founders here in Australia who've done amazing things with very little relative to, what you would expect in the US or Europe. And, they've created jobs, they've created new products that are being exported to the world, that are benefiting all of us through higher tax revenues, that are, putting Australia on the map. But when it comes to politicians, that's where I thought that's where my sort of, my faith is sort of replaced with a rising sense of cynicism. And I just really do hope that we can take a better path. Although to take it all the way back to the start with all this stuff with the central banks and the bond yields and all that sort of stuff, I think it just shows that people are, even the market perhaps is losing faith in the fact that these people know what they're doing.
Well, I think that's a very good question on which to end. Do they know what they're doing? My feeling is they have no idea. What they're doing is hoping and jawboning and basically trying to pull a set of levers that probably aren't that connected to reality. But I guess we'll see. Tarric, I always appreciate your Friday afternoon chats, because we go into some really interesting and deep areas. And we always come out with some question mark at the end. And unfortunately, we've done it again.
Yeah, well, that's our job, mate. It's what the people expect.
Thanks for your time today, and we'll pick it up again down the track, of course, as normal. Appreciate it.
No worries, mate. Looking forward to it.
Take care. Bye.